English poetry takes on some very rich flavorings in the character of Christina Rossetti. Born 1830, lived until 1894, long but not extraordinarily long life. She was the daughter of an exiled Italian scholar, the sister of Dante Gabriel Rossetti, fellow poet, painter, and founder of the Pre-Raphaelites. She was a devout Anglican all her life, and drawn into the harshly Anglo-Catholic Tractarian movement that tried to pull Anglicanism closer to a kind of Catholic ideal. She was deeply sensual in her belief system and was always very Italian in that way, and sought to lock in a greater understanding of the sensuality of Catholicism, or the sensuality of spiritualism, Christianity generally, of within the proper Anglican faith, which is a somewhat radical movement in the prim Victorian era of the 1800s. Her religious beliefs are recurring throughout her work. She was a very passionate scholar of poetry. She was largely educated at home, tutored by her mother. She never married. She was engaged twice. She had no children. The history with mental health and some mental illness is a little bit mysterious. She had some significant crises throughout her life, including a very vibrant one around the age of 16, which hampered her much of the rest of her life. Notably, historians will point out that happened right as she was reaching the marriage age. So her relationship to marriage, to men, is very troubled, or at least very curious. And scholars have gone seeking through her work for examples of that theme playing out. In style, and this is really where her work shines, in style, you would characterize her as a kind of late romantic or maybe even early decadent aesthetic. She celebrates excess, sensuality, passion, a kind of overwhelming force of the senses that was going quite against the grain of that Victorian propriety and sense of repression that we so associate with the stiff upper lip Brits of the 1800s. And so her work has a great vibrancy to it that is really unique in her particular characterization of it. And you can see one of the more interesting pieces that she has is a relatively short lyric from 1862 called After Death. This is a Petrarchan sonnet. Petrarch, patron saint of Italian poetry, and it takes on it's a very odd piece that takes on a particular mysteriousness as it goes along that is thoroughly Gothic in its kind of dark romantic aspect, and yet also hinting at a kind of modernism. It's really pretty extraordinary. The curtains were half drawn, the floor was swept and strewn with rushes, rosemary and may lay thick upon the bed on which I lay, where through the lattice ivy shadows crept. He leaned above me, thinking that I slept, and could not hear him, but I heard him say, poor child, and as he turned away came a deep silence, and I knew he wept. He did not touch the shroud, or raise the fold that hid my face, or take my hand in his, or ruffle the smooth pillows for my head. He did not love me living, but once dead he pitied me, and very sweet it is to know he is still warm, though I am cold. That's creepy. The curiosity of it is remarkable in that she is writing about or writing from the perspective of a corpse. This is a dead woman reflecting on the love, supposedly the romantic figure in her life, who is visiting her at her wake. And she seems to be taking some triumph on it. She sets the scene in a very almost maudlin way. The curtains were half drawn, the floor was swept and strewn with rushes, rosemary and may, lay thick upon the bed on which I lay. Notice the format here. This is a Petrarchan sonnet, and you can break that down into the octet and the sestet. You can see a very clear rhyme scheme in there. There's the simple Petrarchan form, but also it has the Wordsworthian or Coleridgean even effects of the conversation poem, where the lines are not all clean at the end. They are not all end stopped, and so it has a kind of flow. And even as it is exercising this very rigid formal structure, which is so expressly poetic and arty, it is striving for a kind of natural tone to it, a kind of natural rhythm of speech that is a holdover from the early romantics and maybe a hint towards the modern poets, the modernist era, but it is still infused with this kind of macabre creepiness that is just seeping in at the edges of that very normal, conversational, sober tone. And that tension is part of what gives this poem its magic. The figure of he, not identified by any name, we're left to puzzle. Well, who is he? That's sort of rich too. That's sort of interesting. He leaned above me, thinking that I slept and could not hear him. But here, the poet or the narrator is bringing us inside, and we're saying, "Oh yeah, okay, we can hear him. We're watching," which is creepy. This is like her contemporary Emily Dickinson. I heard a fly buzz when I died, in writing from the perspective of a corpse. Perhaps a precursor to the director Billy Wilder's Sunset Boulevard, where it opens up on a voiceover of a narrator pointing to himself dead in a pool. The oddness of that, the creepiness of that, is like we are now in the perspective, the POV of a corpse. And that's kind of a uncomfortable place to be. Let alone the idea that this is a deeply Catholicized belief. Here, death seems to be a happy state, which is essentially a Catholic belief system, where the Catholics are largely, and I say this as somebody who grew up in the tradition, they largely adhere to the policy, life sucks and then you die. But for Catholics, that's a happy ending, because then you return to God, you return to heaven, and you are out of the mundane drudgery of daily life. And that is seen as a kind of victory at the end. And here, this poem is very much about victory. This poem is very much about, okay, I've got it over him. Or at least that's how the poet, or the poetic voice, the narrator, the corpse, sees it. But it is problematic. It is uncertain. It's like, well, the reader has to pull back a little bit and say, yeah, but you're dead. You might have gotten it over on that guy who maybe wasn't who maybe wasn't the great love of your life, and maybe did not treat you as well as you should. And this is a very puerile attack on that. or childish, puerile would be male, a childish attack on that. I'll show him. So it's kind of a justification of suicide in that. I'll show him by dying, and then he'll feel bad. It's kind of grotesque in that way, which is very much part of the part of the Baudelairean strain of romanticism, and hinting towards the decadence as well. That where, in order to embrace all sense experience, you have to be prepared for horror and disgust, and this is full-throated support of that. Poor child, he said as he turned away. Came a deep silence, and I knew he wept. He did not touch the shroud, or raise the fold that hid my face, or take my hand in his, or ruffle the smooth pillows for my head. He did not love me living, but once dead he pitied me, and very sweet it is to know that he still is warm, though I am cold. So it ends on that cold. That suggests maybe that cold note that they're striking right there is an admission that, well, maybe this isn't a victory. Maybe I'm not in the warm embrace of the Heavenly Father, but I'm just a corpse about to be put in a dank grave. That suggestion at the very end that maybe I didn't think this through. Maybe this isn't a victory, which is casting a little uncertainty on the question of the afterlife in general. Maybe I shouldn't be so confident in the heavenly afterlife, in the ascent to God. It's a creepy poem. It's a bizarre poem. It is in many ways a fun poem. It is a feminist poem in its way. It is asserting a kind of power. The only power that women would have is perhaps over their own death, their own ability to. They don't have power in this world, but maybe they have power to leave it. Again, that's flirting with the question of suicide. So it's right on the border of all these different determinations, interpretations, and you can't really settle anywhere. And that's part of the effect, that disquieting, almost nauseating effect, where you're never ever secure. And that makes this poem and Christina Rossetti's work in general really very powerful.